And now I would like to introduce our presenter today, who will be discussing the hormonal connection between menstrual migraines, cancer, and other conditions. We are very pleased to have with us today Cheryl Myers. Cheryl is an author, a natural medicine practitioner, and an educator. She has been nationally recognized and interviewed by many prestigious publications, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Prevention Magazine. She advocates making sure that we take the best from all worlds of medicine, and she definitely believes in achieving optimal health outcomes, however they may be obtained. Cheryl currently serves as the Chief of Scientific Affairs and Education for Europharma Incorporated. Cheryl is a very gifted presenter, and she always has very enlightening and educational presentations, so I'm sure we're all looking forward to hear her comments today. So at this time, I would like to bring on Cheryl. Good morning, Cheryl, and welcome to Terry Talks Nutrition.
Well, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I very much appreciate it. I am eager to talk to you today about some things that I believe will make a big difference in the health of individuals who are struggling with certain types of hormonal imbalances. So I want to discuss the link between PMS, menstrual migraines, and cancer, because at its root cause, we have some changes in both our exposure to hormones in the environment and the way that our body processes and eliminates hormones from our body. So first I want to say that a lot of the focus today is on women's health, but we should also be aware that when we talk specifically about estrogen and progesterone, that does not mean that men do not also have these hormones. Some people are surprised to find out that women and men have the same hormones. They just have them in different ratios. So, for example, women predominantly have estrogen, they have a lot of progesterone, and a little bit of testosterone, and all of these hormones are important. Men, on the other hand, have a great deal of testosterone, a little bit of estrogen, and a tiny bit of progesterone. So all of them are functional. They're just in different proportions depending upon your gender. And hormone levels change with age. So as you notice, for example, when we look at serum estrogen and serum testosterone in both men and women, you'll know that they peak, our hormones peak from puberty until around the age of 50 or 60. We see a big drop-off then, and they taper off onto more of a level line for the rest of our lives, pretty much the rest of our lives. So when we look at, for example, estrogen in women, you see how very high the estradiol levels get from about the age of 12 to 14 to somewhere between 50 and 60, where it starts to drop off again. Hormones are messengers. I like to think of hormones as bicycle messengers. Have you ever been to New York City or a big city somewhere or watched a show on TV that shows bicycle messengers where they zip in and out of traffic? I think they must be amazingly gifted and talented to weave their way in and out of some of the congestion they have to travel through. And they have the courier packs either on their bikes or on their backs. And the bicycle messenger stops at an office building and hands the office manager a message. Now, that message might be, this has been a fantastic year. Everybody gets a $1,000 bonus. Break out the champagne. So even though the bike messenger himself didn't necessarily do something, the message created a huge reaction. People are tossing their hats in the air, they're jumping up from their desks, they're dancing with each other, they're happy, they're smiling. So the message of the messenger is what created the reaction. Now that very same bicycle messenger might weave in and out of traffic and stop at another office building and hand them a message. And the message might be, it's been a dreadful year. We're closing down the office. You'll be without a job in 2 weeks. Merry Christmas. So guess what? There's going to be a totally different reaction to that message that is being provided. So when you look at hormones, remember that the hormones deliver a message. One of the messages for estrogen, for example, is to grow, to proliferate, to create new tissue, especially in the areas of female sexual health. So the breasts get larger, the hips get wider, there start to be some additional layers of fat that cause a little bit of a more curvy figure. We see the ovaries become active. So some very important things happen to turn a little girl into a beautiful woman. Now, the same thing happens with testosterone. It's such a powerful messenger. So it turns a little boy into a big strapping man with broad shoulders and a thicker chest and hair in parts of his body that he didn't have when he was a child. All of these things happen because of the messages that hormones provide. So remember, hormones are incredibly powerful. Hormone levels change when they are disrupted. There are certain hormone disruptors or xenoestrogens in our environment. And I always say not Xena, warrior princess, although she's pretty powerful on her own, but xeno meaning foreign estrogens. So we all know that BPA is bad in plastics, right? You don't want canned foods that have BPA plastic linings in the can. You don't want to drink your daily water when you go for a jog from a BPA plastic bottle. BPA bisphenol A is indicated in a lot of different physical problems, especially breast cancer. High levels of BPA are associated with the changes in breast tissue that lead to breast cancer. So we all know it's unhealthy, but did you know why? It's because BPA is a xenoestrogen. It looks like estrogen to the body. Dioxin is another one that looks like estrogen to the body. Phthalates. Phthalates are also plasticizers. You see them sometimes in fingernail polish and cosmetics. Phthalates were, up until recently, up until about 10 or 12 years ago, phthalates were in baby toys, especially the little chewy rings that the babies would chew on. But they are banned from children's plastic toys now. All of these things look like estrogen in the body. And remember, what's estrogen? It's a messenger. So if it looks like estrogen, your body can make a mistake and misunderstand the message. So these hormone disruptors and xenoestrogens can increase production of some hormones. They can also decrease production of certain hormones. They act like hormones themselves, and when you think of a hormone receptor as a light switch, they flip on a bunch of light switches that aren't supposed to be flipped on. And they can even turn one hormone into another and interfere with the way that hormones provide their signals to the hormone receptors. So without getting too technical, just remember that these are foreign compounds that come into the body that act like estrogen and trick your body into behaving in ways that are very unhealthy. Some of the hiding places for these xenoestrogens, tampons, plastic dishes, shampoos, water bottles, cosmetics, tap water, pesticides and herbicides. Some of them are hormone disruptors and xenoestrogens that are used on our produce. And this one might surprise some of you, cash register tape. That heat-sensitive cash register tape has a lot of xenoestrogens, and I worry about these people that are handling these receipts all day long, if that's the system that they are using. What are they absorbing through their skin? So bisphenol A, for example, increases cancer cell spread. So there's two different types of triple-negative breast cancer cells. Exposure to BPA increases cancer cell invasion by almost 200%. So it doubles cancer cell invasion. When you look at BPA exposure, where can we find this? Places like the lining of metal food cans. So if you use canned food, I'm not against canned food, but I think we have to shop wisely and read the labels. If there's a white lining on the inside of the can for acidic foods like pineapples and tomatoes jump to mind, you can't just put pineapples or tomatoes in a can. They usually have to have some kind of coating in the can to prevent the acid from reacting with the metal. So make sure that the label says that the lining is BPA-free. Otherwise, you've got an acidic food like tomatoes or pineapples or something else acidic sitting in a can that's lined with BPA plastic, and what do the acids do? They leach more and more of that xenoestrogen out into the food. Triple-negative breast cancer is the most aggressive and the most difficult to treat form of breast cancer, and BPA can dramatically increase that type of cancer cell spread, and that's just one single study on BPA. Another issue we run into when we're dealing with other issues associated with hormonal imbalances is estrogen dominance. So as we age, our hormones wax and wane. They go high, they go low, and then they taper off. And here's for those of you who are joining us via internet, when you're watching via the WebEx system, you can see this slide where right before ovulation, for example, estrogen peaks, and it triggers ovulation. After ovulation, mid-cycle, progesterone peaks, because progesterone means pro for gestation. It's responsible for helping to create a hospitable environment for the new baby to start to grow. If no new baby is produced, then the progesterone drops off, and that triggers menstruation. It sheds the nest until the next month so it can rebuild a new nest to catch the little baby if a baby is created. So these are just some of the issues that happen over time. Up until recent history, women experienced a great many pregnancies. And you have a certain level of, you're not going to have the peaks and valleys of both estrogen, progesterone, and luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone. You're not going to have the peaks and valleys like you do if you're not pregnant. So for a lot of women's reproductive life, more than half of most women's reproductive life, they were pregnant. Well, nowadays, a woman's reproductive life, if we say it's from 12 to 52, let's say 40 years, women are not going to spend 20 years being pregnant. And if you look at 42, even that, they're not going to spend 30 or 15 years being pregnant. Most women are pregnant for a year or two because our family sizes are getting smaller. That means that we have more cycling, we have more complexity in the emotional aspects and the physical aspects responding to the constant change in hormones. Some women seem to be, I don't know if it's genetic or lifestyle, and maybe a combination of both. Many women seem to sail through their years of hormonal peaks and valleys without a lot of adverse physical symptoms, and some women seem incredibly plagued by them. For example, menstrual migraines. Women, a lot of the migraine headaches that women experience are right prior to the beginning of menstruation. So when we start to see these changes and these drop-offs of the progesterone and the estrogens where they start to plummet to trigger menstruation, that very often triggers menstrual migraines or migraine headaches in women who are susceptible to that. These are also not necessarily the healthiest environment for our cells associated with reproduction. So the uterus, the cervix, the ovaries, the breasts, I know they're not involved in reproduction, but they are involved in nourishing the child. So those types of cellular tissues that are receptive to the sex hormones of the progesterones, the estrogens, et cetera, can become quite vulnerable to mistakes. Now, another thing that happens, especially as women start to get over 35 or 40, is that they start to see that the estrogen stays high and the progesterone starts to fall off, and we end up in a situation of estrogen dominance. We also see this happen in younger women that are exposed to a lot of xenoestrogens or foreign estrogens, where the estrogen levels get higher and higher, or the response of the body to estrogen gets higher and higher, and it gets out of balance with the progesterone. I like to think of this as a bicycle built for two. If estrogen is on one seat and progesterone is on the other, you make the best progress when they're both pedaling at the same speed and with the same level of energy. But what happens if all of a sudden progesterone gets weaker and weaker and estrogen gets stronger and stronger? It has to pick up the pace and compensate for the other hormone. The same is true if estrogen starts to drop off and stops pedaling. Progesterone's going to have to work a lot harder. So that's why we see so many of these symptoms associated with estrogen dominance. And I'm seeing them in younger and younger women. Hot flashes, night sweats, bloating, weight gain, infertility, headaches, depression, mood swings. I want to take a moment to talk about weight gain. Remember what the role of estrogen is? Certain forms of estrogen want you to grow, grow, grow. If you have too much of those forms, they're going to increase adipose or fat tissue from the waist down. So we don't see a huge amount of estrogen dominance or estrogen issues in abdominal weight gain. We see it in the bottom, in the buttocks, in the thighs, from the waist down, the hips. The problem with that is the hardest fat to lose, because the most dangerous form of fat is around your middle. So if you have a lot of abdominal obesity, that's called metabolically active fat. That means it goes on quick, it comes off quick. So if you go on a diet, that's what's going to come off first. But it's also what interferes the most with the metabolism of the body. The storage in women in the hips and the thighs are not nearly as dangerous from a metabolic perspective. They're not, it's not linked as much with like heart disease or diabetes or those issues. Hip and thigh fat is Mother Nature's way of making sure that the mama has plenty of food on board, even if they enter a time of famine, to nourish the growing baby. So women are really good. Have you ever noticed that you see a lot more women with waist-down fat than you do men? It's because it's a workaround based on estrogen having to do with making sure that mama has enough nourishment. Because our bodies are Stone Age bodies. Our bodies have not changed very much since the Stone Age. However, we are living in a modern world. So all of a sudden, I often say we are living in the midst of a chemistry experiment. We do not know what the combination of all the chemicals that have been released into our air, our soil, our food, our water system, we do not know what each one of those does, let alone what they do in combination. So we're in the middle of a big experiment, and who knows how it will end. However, we do know that we need to rein in some of that excessive estrogen exposure and xenoestrogen exposure, or else we're going to continue to see a lot of issues with women developing more fat from the waist down, in addition to all of these other symptoms as well. Now let's talk for a minute about migraine headaches. Migraines can be mild enough, believe it or not, there are such things as mild, that they're just mistaken for a little bit of a headache or a little pain maybe behind an eye or maybe even both eyes. But they can go from that to debilitating, to vomiting, laying in a dark room with cold cloths over your face, or going to the emergency room to try to get out of pain. Menstrual migraines can be hideously severe. I have known, thank God not a lot, but I have known women who miss 2 or 3 work days every month. Could you afford to miss 2 or 3 work days every month because of your menstrual migraines? They usually occur a few days before bleeding occur, and during the first, usually not 3 days, but I'd say at least the first day or 2 of menstruation. Usually they start to get better when the menstruation actually starts. Migraines can last anywhere from 12 hours to 3 or 4 days, so they can be pretty severe. The estrogen levels drop throughout the cycle. The number of migraines can increase. So a woman might have 1 or 2 menstrual migraines a year when she's 20, and all of a sudden start having 6 or 7 menstrual migraines a year when she's 40. Because the drop-off becomes more of a cliff event. Because there's less estrogen on board when that drop-off comes, it can be more stark. Now, let's take a moment to talk about men for a moment. You may have heard of a lot about men's hormones changing with age. They don't have the same kind of external signaling like a woman does. A woman knows that she's entered menopause when her menstruation ceases. Men don't have that kind of signal, but there are definitely hormonal changes. Sometimes they call it menopause, sometimes they call it male menopause, something. I've heard andropause a lot. And this reduction in hormones, especially hormones in their healthiest form, can lead to depression, reduced muscle mass, increased body fat, boobs or man boobs, enlargement of the fat tissue in the chest area, and erectile dysfunction. So let's talk about natural interventions to help restore hormonal balance. So hormones in the right ratio and hormones in their most beneficial forms, because hormones, estrogen is a family, it's not a single compound. Testosterone is a family, it's not a single compound. There's good forms, and bad forms, forms that cause trouble. So we want to have the hormones in the right ratio without estrogen dominance in men or women. We want the hormones to stay in their most beneficial forms for the longest periods of time, and we want them to be processed effectively by the liver. Both xenoestrogens that you're exposed to in the environment and hormonal disruptors, and our body's own estrogens, when they break down and are taken out of circulation, are processed via the liver. And if your liver isn't working well, you're not going to detoxify very well, And if you can't get that xenoestrogen out of the bloodstream, it just keeps circling. Every time it goes around the body in the circulation, in the blood circulation, it exposes all the cells to that estrogen all over again. So if you have liver slowdown, it makes you more prone to the migraine, headaches, cervical dysplasia, cervical changes that you detect with pap smears for risk for cervical cancer, changes in the cells that are moving in the wrong direction, uterine cancer, ovarian, breast cancer, all of these different things. If the liver is not detoxing properly to get those excess estrogens out of the body is more exposed to the toxic form of those chemicals. Now, I first want to talk about diindolylmethane, and it's sure a mouthful to say, isn't it? So DIM is usually what they call it, DIM. This is a compound found in, it's a form of a compound found in cruciferous vegetables, including broccoli and cabbage. So we know that cruciferous vegetables, women who eat a lot of them have lower rates of certain types of hormonal issues than women who do not. There is a compound in these vegetables called indole-3-carbinol, IC3. Or I3C. I've seen it both ways. Indole-3-carbinol is a precursor to diindolylmethane. So if you eat fresh broccoli and you ingest some indole-3-carbinol, the act of chewing, the mixture with saliva, and the digestion in the body, and that acid in the tummy flips it into this form called DIM. Not everybody does that very effectively. So if you try to take indole-3-carbinol as a supplement to help with your hormonal balance, you have to take a lot of it. And there are some adverse effects associated with very high levels of indole-3-carbinol. That's why I think the better way to do it is to cut out the middleman and go straight to the diindolylmethane, DIM. In fact, to get a medicinal amount of DIM in your body, you would have to eat about 2 pounds of broccoli. So it's a highly concentrated form of a unique compound found in these cruciferous vegetables. So how it works, it's a little complex, but in essence, it helps to prevent estrogen and testosterone from converting into the forms that are most harmful. So it helps keep these hormones in their safest form. For example, in benign and precancerous conditions, 150 milligrams of a DIM complex improve the ratio of the good estrogens to the harmful estrogens by a whopping 76%. So as things are detoxified in our body and as estrogen moves through its life cycle in the body, it can convert into forms that are pro-cancerous when it comes to stimulating our cells in a way that they shouldn't be stimulated. This helps to intervene and keep the estrogens and testosterone in their healthier forms. So if you really like the science, there's a lot of different kinds of active estrogens. When we look at this diagram, we want our estrogens to move into their life cycle of going into 2-methoxyestradiol and 2-methoxyestrone. These are protective forms of estrogen, and they are actually protective against cancer. If the estrogens are converted during their life cycle into these like 16-alpha estrones into active estrogen estriol, these are all carcinogenic and pro-proliferative. They increase the proliferation rate of cells and make them more vulnerable to cancerous mutations. So I always say that DIM is something like a traffic cop that stands in the road and waves most of the traffic up towards the good highway and away from the highway with all the potholes. So you're always going to have a certain ratio. You're always going to have a certain ratio of the good estrogens to the more problematic estrogens. They're always going to be in a ratio. But the people that are the healthiest without risk for hormonally active cancers or menstrual migraines or PMS or difficult menopausal transitions or uterine fibroids, endometriosis, all of these things that are triggered or made worse by the negative, they're going to have a lot fewer issues with those types of health problems than people who have a bad ratio, less of the good and more of the bad. So in this study, they looked at women with thyroid cancer. So they were supplemented for 14 days with a clinically studied form of DIM called bioresponse DIM. Now, bioresponse DIM is blended with some other compounds to enhance its absorption. And to the best of my knowledge, I believe bioresponse DIM is the only form of DIM that has published human clinical studies, unless something has come out recently. People who do research in this area use this form of DIM. And in this, they found that 6 of the 7 women had much better levels and much better ratios of their estrogens after only 2 weeks of supplementation. And if you look, for example, in patient 2, there was a huge dramatic difference in the beneficial estrogens. Only one of the patients, patient 3, out of the 7, actually didn't have much benefit for improving her estrogen ratios. Everyone else had very dramatic results. In that same group of 7 women with thyroid cancer, they all experienced a reduction in harmful estrogen levels after only 2 weeks of use. So even though patient 3 didn't have an improvement in her ratio, she did have a reduction in the negative form of estrogens that can be pro-cancerous, and in fact, 3 of the patients, they eliminated that form. When DIM was combined with radiation treatment for breast cancer, it increased cancer cell death by 30% versus radiation alone. In women with a genetic mutation associated with breast cancer, DIM supplementation increased the activity of those cancer-preventing genes, so it goosed up the body's own ability to prevent cancer by a whopping 34%. And in the study of men and DIM, men with precancerous cell changes associated with the development of prostate cancer, 12 months or staying on DIM for a full year resulted in a complete regression in almost half of those patients. In the placebo, there was no regression whatsoever. It just continued down its negative course. Now, there's some other things that we may want to use along with DIM to help restore hormonal balance and the ability of the body to properly route, channel, and detoxify hormones. One that I love is curcumin. Now, curcumin is from turmeric, and if you love turmeric, I hope you eat it breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's a great spice. But when you're using it as a medicine, you have to use curcumin because it's only about 2 to 5% of turmeric. And you couldn't take enough turmeric to get the levels of curcumin in the bloodstream to copy or to replicate some of the human clinical trials that use curcumin. So one of the ways I am particularly interested in using curcumin, since it's poorly absorbed, is in a form that is blended with turmeric essential oil and turmerones, which not only enhances absorption but provides additional anti-cancer benefits. So it's anti-cancer, antioxidant, and more. It also helps to protect the liver. So it increases levels of protective antioxidants that are depleted when the liver processes toxins. So the liver has a busy, busy job to do. And the liver has to use up its resources, like its antioxidant resources, when it's grabbing some of these xenoestrogens, pesticides, herbicides, BPAs, phthalates, etc., from the bloodstream. Curcumin helps to restore those resources. Additionally, curcumin enhances liver metabolism. It makes the liver stronger, and it helps the liver get rid of toxins more quickly. It increases the ability of the liver to make bile. Bile, I always call it the toxin taxi cab. So the liver grabs things out of the bloodstream. It changes them twice. That's why they call it phase 1 and phase 2 glucuronidation as part of the detoxification process. So it changes the compounds it grabs twice to convert them into forms that are better eliminated, dissolves them in bile, and then the bile is released by the liver into the gallbladder, where it sits in a little bag for a while, a little cistern, a little storage unit. And then when the food train comes along through the intestines, it sends a signal, and that bag contracts and pushes all the bile out into the intestines, where it mixes with the food, and those toxins are carried out of the body. Pretty elegant system. I'm always asked the question, what happens if I don't have a gallbladder? Well, you can live without a gallbladder, but then the bile duct that carries the bile from the liver into the intestines is hooked up directly to the intestines. So if you have no gallbladder, instead of waiting for the food train to come along and having the whole bucket dumped in at one time, it's drip, drip, dripped into the intestines constantly. So there's a couple of downsides to this. Number one, it can be irritating to the intestinal tissue. And number two, sometimes there will be food there and sometimes there won't. If there's no food there, you have to worry about the reabsorption of the different toxins that the liver's trying to eliminate. So if you don't have a gallbladder, there are techniques you can use, like eating 5 small meals a day instead of 3 large ones, or taking fiber supplements between meals and before bed so that there's always a cushion there and there's always something that can grab those toxins and carry them out of the body. Additionally, curcumin on its own in a cellular study showed an 80% inhibition of breast cancer cell replication. So when you use curcumin along with them, it can be particularly beneficial for some of these hormonally dependent cancers. Curcumin also reduces estradiol levels in endometriosis. Endometriosis is when endometrial tissue, a type of uterine tissue, starts to grow outside of the uterus. It can cause really painful periods. It can cause a lot of cramping and severe discomfort, sometimes not even during the menstrual cycle. Some of the treatments for endometriosis, if it's bad enough, is they will do a hysterectomy and remove the uterus entirely. Endometriosis is almost entirely estrogen dependent, and the estradiol is a form of estrogen that increases endometrial cell growth. So curcumin stops the endometrial cell growth and spread by reducing the estradiol levels specifically in the endometrial tissues. So it doesn't affect overall estrogen levels, but it helps to reduce the negative estrogen levels in the tissue that is really sensitive to the damaging effects of estradiol. In fact, a 37% decline in these levels. That's a big deal. So it works at helping the cell resist the influence of these negative estrogenic compounds. Another botanical that has been really useful and shown in studies to help with hormonally activated diseases within the body is grapeseed extract. Grapeseed is a source of a compound called oligomeric proanthocyanidins. Try to say that 3 times fast. A lot easier to say OPCs. OPCs come in all sizes. So they can be small or they can be large. Sometimes I tell patients they can be Chihuahuas or they can be Great Danes. If they are Great Danes, they cannot squeeze through the doggy door. You're not going to get any benefit. The largest size OPCs are called tannins. They're not going to hurt you, but they're not going to be absorbed and utilized either. So I believe if you really want a medicinal grapeseed, a clinical kind of grapeseed extract, then you need to look for the small, low molecular weight. Make sure it says tannin-free so that it is 100% absorbable. So OPCs are anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, and more. They're also water-soluble, whereas curcumin is fat-soluble, grapeseed extract is water-soluble. I often say if you take both of them together, they go everywhere and they do everything. Grapeseed extract has been shown to help the liver process toxins and used up hormones. Remember, the liver has to take our own body's hormones out of circulation too. Our hormones do not live forever. You do not have the same estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone in your body now as you did 20 years ago. There's constant turnover. And as they start to be broken down, they make more mistakes. And it's the job of the liver to be able to pull those out of circulation and get them out of the body. So what they found is that it improves the liver's ability to get these toxins out, and a 58% increase in the liver antioxidant levels, which are necessary for proper detoxification. Grapeseed extract on its own has also been shown in cell studies and scientific models to slow down or even stop the spread of invasive triple-negative breast cancer. That's the most aggressive and difficult form to treat a breast cancer. So using these together in a protocol can be extremely beneficial, regardless of what type of hormonal issue you're dealing with. Grapeseed also inhibits aromatase, which is an enzyme. Anything that ends in ASE in the body is usually an enzyme. This enzyme converts testosterone to estrogen. They can switch back and forth. Testosterone and estrogen are 2 sides of the same coin, but ooh la la the difference, right? But they can be converted one to the other. Aromatase turns the testosterone in a woman's body into estrogen and into a man as well. Higher levels of aromatase in breast tissue are associated with breast cancer, so you want to get that down to more normalized levels, and grapeseed can act as a mild aromatase inhibitor. You don't want to stop that process entirely, but you certainly do not want it to be overactive, because that too is a risk for hormonally activated cancers. In fact, when we look at a decrease in aromatase activity, you can see that the increasing dosage levels of grapeseed extract reduce the aromatase activity to greater and greater levels. This may surprise you, but there's a huge connection between the estrogens in the body and the estrogen ratios in the body and the gut biome. And, you know, if you talk to a naturopathic physician, or if you are a naturopathic or integrative physician, their mantra is everything starts in the gut, all disease and all health starts in the gut. And I tend to kind of agree with that. Estrogen promotes greater diversity of beneficial bacteria in the gut. Estrogen is required to keep the gut barrier strong and healthy. So if your estrogen starts to be out of whack, or if you have more of the negative forms than the positive forms, this can play a role in increased intestinal permeability, which many people refer to as leaky gut syndrome. Leaky gut syndrome is associated with about every autoimmune disease on the planet, and some non-autoimmune diseases, because leaky gut means you're absorbing molecules that are too large, the doorways are open too wide, and the larger molecules that are bound together the body doesn't recognize. And even though it might be a protein from food or a nutrient from food, the body thinks it's an invader and activates the immune system to fight back. That can lead to just horrible disruptions throughout the body. So it's important to keep that gut barrier strong and healthy, and to keep those doorways shut tight and of a size that they only absorb nutrients that are of the proper size for the body to recognize. Diseases that are much more common in women, like multiple sclerosis, have also been associated with gut dysbiosis. So even from a gut biome perspective, it's important to keep our estrogen levels in the right form and in their healthiest form. Now, you may also want to, if you're having a lot of issues, you might also want to supplement with probiotics. I love probiotics. I think they're amazing. However, there's a gazillion on the market, I'm sure you're aware, and it's important that the probiotics are alive and that they are of a strong enough strain that not only are they going to get to your intestines alive and kicking, but they're going to take up residence and start to replicate like bunnies. That's what you want. That's what you want from your probiotics. Now, all probiotics are not equal, and not all strains of probiotics are equal as well. I always say there's a group of animals out there called horses. And some of the horses are plow horses that you can buy for $99. Maybe they're 20 years old and their back's swaying a little bit. Or they can be Kentucky thoroughbred racehorses, which go for millions of dollars. So if you're trying to win a race, which horse are you going to choose? But they're all legally called horses, right? The same is true of probiotics. They're all legally called probiotics, whether they die in your gut or not, whether they implant or not. They're all legally called probiotic bacteria. Some of them are bred over successive generations to be strong and acid-resistant and shelf-stable, and some are incredibly weak and vulnerable. So if you take a gazillion billion at one time, and they are the wrong kind and they're the weaker sort, every single one's going to be dead before it even gets to your gut. If you take lower levels of clinically studied forms of probiotics that are shown to resist acid and are shown to be able to be strong and to implant and to replicate freely, then you're going to be able to get away with 10, 20 billion at a time and still be able to derive healthy benefits. So some of the ones that are naturally found in the gastrointestinal tract, that's another issue with probiotics, is some are including strains that are not from the human gastrointestinal tract. So Lactobacillus plantarum is one, Lactobacillus rhamnosus, and Bifidobacterium bifidum. All three are associated with helping individuals who may be struggling with the right bacterial balance in the gut that leads to intestinal permeability problems. Or also some studies on inflammatory bowel, irritable bowel, Crohn's disease, et cetera. So those are some good strains to look at. Store them properly. You don't necessarily have to refrigerate them. They are shelf stable. Store them away from extreme heat and humidity, but for the most part, these are incredibly beneficial forms. Now, Another dietary intervention that may sound weird. So sometimes I'll see a patient or a woman will come to me and she'll say, I'm just having horrible PMS, and I ask her, how much fiber is in your diet? A lot of foods that are high in fiber might be high in calories as well, or it might be somebody who's carb counting, and as you know, fats and proteins don't have any fiber. They are found in vegetables and in breads and in grains. So if you've got someone for health reasons who's going a little bit on the paleo side, they have a real difficult time sometimes getting the amount of fiber on board. So I say, take a fiber supplement. They look at me. It's like, how's a fiber supplement, or how's fiber going to help? I'm sorry, you misunderstood me. I'm not constipated. Well, maybe I am a little. What I'm talking to you about are my hormonal issues. You know, remember when I said that estrogens and xenoestrogens are detoxified and eliminated by the liver? Well, they are dumped into the gut. And they're dumped into the gut when the food comes along in a perfect scenario. And then the food absorbs these toxins and carries them out of the body. If you have a very low fiber diet, or if you eat one meal that contains 0 fiber, like maybe you have a piece of chicken for lunch and, and a cup of coffee, that has no fiber whatsoever. So whatever toxins are dumped into the gut, guess what happens? They get reabsorbed. They go right back into the bloodstream. It puts a huge stress on your liver because now the liver has to take them out of the bloodstream again and prepare them for elimination. So it gets to be a vicious cycle. So if you don't eat optimal amounts of fiber, and it's a lot, 20 to 30 grams of fiber a day are what's recommended, you can take fiber supplements. Find a fiber that you enjoy, soluble, insoluble, blend of both. They also increase the amount of probiotics in the gut. They also increase the healthy bacteria because the healthy bacteria, the healthy microorganisms in your gut eat soluble fiber and a little bit of the insoluble. But guess what? The bad things in your gut, like your yeasts, etc., they eat sugar. So in the olden days, remember when I said we're Stone Age bodies living in a modern world? In the olden days, people ate enormous amounts of fiber and not very much sugar. So they fed their little probiotics there, and they grew and they thrived. Now we eat higher levels of sugar, which feeds more of the yeasts and pathogenic bacteria, and less of the fiber to feed the good, and so the good guys are starting to get starved out. So if you don't have fiber, there's not going to be any binding of these hormones and fake hormones that are taken out of circulation to eliminate from the body. You do not want these dangerous forms of estrogen and toxic xenoestrogens to be reabsorbed. So you need to increase your fiber intake. And I would not just take it all at one time. Don't just get up in the morning and take a whopping dose of fiber. If you are using fiber supplements, try to increase fiber in your meals, lots of fruits, vegetables, nuts. If you're into whole grains, if you're comfortable with that, you're not on a low carb diet, then increase those, and also take fiber supplements like 2 or 3 times throughout the day. I absolutely guarantee you that you will see a measurable improvement in hormonal balance and hormonal health in 2 to 6 weeks. It's pretty rapid. Women are pretty amazed when this happens. Okay, quick recap, and then we'll go into questions. Help for hormones, regardless of what your issues are: PMS, perimenopause, uterine fibroids, cervical dysplasia, risks for cancers, different kinds of hormonally activated cancers, menstrual migraines. All of these have, as part of, or a large part of their root cause, is a disruption in levels of estrogens in the body and the balance of the good to the bad estrogens in the body. So DIM is ideal for any hormone-related problem. And it can also be useful in men. So it helps to keep testosterone in its beneficial form. In fact, muscle builders or bodybuilders, competitive bodybuilders, abuse the heck out of DIM. Thank God it's so safe, to get better muscle definition and better muscle growth because of this activity. They take many times the recommended dosage, especially when they're preparing for a show. It also has anti-cancer activity. Just about everything that's a risk for breast cancer is a risk for prostate cancer. It also has beneficial activity for men who have issues with prostate cancer as well. So a good dosage is about 120 milligrams of DIM. I mean the bioresponse DIM, the one that has facilitated absorption, and about 250 milligrams of curcumin and grapeseed. I like the French grapeseed that's tannin-free. You can increase these dosages as needed, but you generally don't have to increase them tremendously. For most people, probiotics are really important to include. You don't have to take those over the course of the day. Take them once a day and take them with food, because food helps to promote the liveliness of the probiotics because they're shielded from some of the activity throughout the gastrointestinal tract, and they have something to eat on their way. Probiotics like to eat food too. So I'd like to take them with food and increase your fiber intake. If you are prone to gas and flatus, or what I like to call embarrassing elevated moments, if you suddenly and dramatically increase your fiber, you may increase intestinal gas. So do it slowly. If that's an issue for you, if that makes you uncomfortable, do it slowly. Spread the fiber out throughout the day. Build your tolerance until you get up to at least 20 grams of fiber a day, not just supplementally, but I mean as a combination of the fiber in your food and the fiber in your supplements. Become an avid label reader. When you read the labels of your food, take note of how many grams of fiber you're delivering. You might be delighted to find that some of the foods you're eating have very high in fiber, and you might be very surprised that some of the foods you're eating are very low in fiber. Increase your fiber intake. It makes all the difference. So I thank you for taking time out of your busy day to learn more about the connections between certain hormonally activated problems in the body like menstrual migraines, perimenopause, PMS, severe PMS, uterine fibroids, cervical dysplasia. The list goes on, and every kind of hormonally activated or hormonally responsive cancer. All of these have a root cause of these disrupted estrogens, exposure to xenoestrogens, and inability to detoxify and eliminate these compounds from the body. So I hope this has been useful. I notice we already have some questions in the queue, so I'm going to turn it back over to Lexi.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. I think that was an excellent presentation with a lot of great points that people can take home and apply in their own lives. We do have some questions that have come into our question and answer queue, so we're going to go ahead and get to those. So folks, just a reminder, if you would like to ask our presenter today a question, you can use the chat box feature. Just click on the blue chat bubble on the top of your window to activate the chat box, or you can click on the blue square box with a question in it to open the question and answer, and in that way you can just type in a message and we'll be going through those and reading them off for our presenter. So Cheryl, if you don't mind, let's get started here. All right. Now I cannot seem to get my chat window to open, so hopefully yours will. Let me see. Here we go. I had one question that came through the chat box, and it was a question slightly off topic, but what about deodorant? Does deodorant have any effect on hormone levels in cancer?
I don't know that it has a huge impact on hormonal levels, but there are, and I don't know quite honestly if they've been removed from the market or not, but there are, especially like bar deodorants, that can have plasticizers in them. So read the labels carefully, and if they do have like some of the if they do have some of the plasticizers, like the phthalates and such, I would stay away from them and look for something a little bit more natural. So good question. I also have some concerns about aerosol deodorants. Well, number one, not being so good for the environment because of their release of certain chemicals, but I don't know that they have as much in the way of plasticizers, but sometimes there can be other compounds in there as well.
Okay, now a question about estradiol. So what about women going through menopause when estradiol levels decrease and estrone levels are present? Would you use the DIM with bioidentical estradiol supplementation?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because it doesn't affect, DIM does not affect the overall amounts of estrogen in any form in your body. It just keeps it in the safer form. Now, if you're going to supplement with bioidentical hormones, which I know a lot of women do and some men do as well, I think that's the safest way to do it is in the topical creams, because when you take these estrogens orally, some things can happen during the digestion process that make them very prone to going into the worst form of the hormone. When you avoid that part of the digestive process by applying them topically, I think they're much safer and can be very beneficial to a lot of people. But remember that even the safe and healthy amounts, not all estradiol is bad. It's just certain forms of estradiol is bad, just like not all estrogen is bad, just certain forms are bad. So you would, if you're taking bioidentical topical hormones, or even more importantly, if you're taking oral hormones like Premarin or something along those lines, you absolutely need DIM on board, because those supplemental hormones are more prone to conversion into going to the dark side, so to speak. They go to the bad form of the hormone, which may be why using oral estrogens like Premarin, et cetera, are associated with increased risk for certain kinds of hormonally activated cancers. So yes, absolutely, I would use it.
Do you recommend DIM for women who have regular but heavy monthly menstrual flows? And so this person notes they also get migraines every month associated with their period. And finally, does DIM make you gain weight?
Well, let me start with the last. That's the easiest. DIM absolutely does not make you gain weight. In fact, it may help you to lose weight. I never pitch anything as a weight loss miracle, but I do know that there are certain kinds of nutrient supplements that can make your body have an easier time of it. The hardest weight to lose is from the waist down, and if you have enough DIM on board, you're helping to keep the estrogen in the form that does not promote weight gain from the waist down. So if you've been riding a bicycle and walking and eating right, and you still can't lose some of that thigh weight or hip weight, I would absolutely incorporate DIM and see if that doesn't help. If you have a very heavy monthly menstrual flow, it may be that you have a slow thyroid gland. That's often associated with very heavy, regular but very heavy menstrual flow. Low thyroid functionality is also associated with women who have irregular periods, women who may have a period in 6 weeks instead of 4, and then the next month in 3, and it skips all over the place. That's also associated with low thyroid activity. So you might want to think about supplementing a little bit with iodine to get your thyroid function up a little bit higher. This has nothing to do with the menstrual migraine so much or the DIM, but if you get better functionality with your thyroid gland and help to squeeze out, using iodine squeezes out iodine competitors from the body that can promote these problems, like your fluorides and the fluorides and chlorines and bromides, like brominated flour, brominated vegetable oils, and soft drinks, that sort of thing. So absolutely, I would think about adding some iodine. I would say between 6.25 and 12.5 milligrams. I like a blend of iodines. I'm not a fan of the liquids because it's harder to get the exact dosage. I like the capsule forms. But I would think about supplementing with some iodine, number one, to get your thyroid working a little bit more healthily. But the DIM may help with some of the symptoms associated with that and will absolutely help with the menstrual migraines, because the menstrual migraines are not triggered because of low thyroid function. The menstrual migraines are triggered because of the sudden drop-off of the hormones. So as I said, absolutely I would incorporate the DIM, but I would think about increasing the thyroid function as well.
Okay, we have a couple questions about DIM and ages that you would recommend. So a couple people have asked about teens specifically. So how young would you suggest for young girls who have started their period?
If young ladies are having a lot of hormonal issues, if they're really super uncomfortable, having a lot of breast swelling or cramping, mood changes especially, and sometimes girls have mild headaches that they don't realize are sort of migrainous in nature. As long as if she's menstruating, there's nothing dangerous about using the DIM.
Okay.
I mean, there's nothing dangerous about using it when you're not menstruating either. I don't mean to make it sound like it's dangerous if it's used for younger kids. It's just that younger kids generally, because their hormones aren't really going to town yet, so to speak, I'm not aware of when you or why you would use DIM in a kid that has not gone through puberty.
Okay, good clarification there. Does increasing testosterone, boosting testosterone, help to lower estrogen?
No, not exactly. Increasing testosterone doesn't cause estrogen to stop being made. I think that people sometimes get that idea because if you help to reduce the aromatase activity in the body, there's less of the testosterone being converted into estrogen. Women need testosterone. Women need it for bone health, mood, libido, sex drive, proper weight distribution in the body, muscle growth. Women need testosterone, and low testosterone levels can be a problem. So keeping that testosterone in its active testosterone form in ladies is very important for health. You don't want a bunch of it converting to estrogen. So it does not lower estrogen levels. It just protects the testosterone and keeps it active longer.
Okay, switching gears a little bit to OPCs. Do OPCs contain sulfites?
No. And that's an excellent question because it sounds like it's from someone who has trouble with sulfites that are in wine. There's wine that has sulfites in it and some wine that is sulfite-free. The sulfites are sometimes in sensitive individuals associated with headaches. That's a very good question, though. But the OPCs are from the grape seed. They're not from the whole grape. There's no preservatives added. The grape seed is more about the fact that you're getting the OPCs. In fact, grapeseed extract is about, I'm guessing this, I think it's around 90% polyphenols, of which about 85% are OPCs. So no, there's no sulfites in grapeseed extract.